I'm Ellen Mary.
And I'm Michael Perry.
And he's a plant geek.
And she's a plant addict.
And this is the Plant-Based Podcast.
This is more than just a gardening podcast. We'll be exploring the world of plants from every possible angle. We'll be talking about plant-based diets, plant materials and fabrics, the well-being qualities of plants, and giving plenty of gardening tips and tricks.
So we'll be chatting worldwide to companies and individuals that are being creative with plants in new and exciting ways. From fabulous flower crowns to foliage-filled lounges.
Botanical moisturisers to bamboo clothing.
It's all here.
And it's all made of plants.
Suttons, suppliers of gardening products since 1806, sponsor the Plant-Based Podcast. Visit them online at suttons.co.uk.
So we're here today with Emma Howard, and Emma is studying plant genetics and crop improvement, aren't you?
Yes.
This sounds really very serious. I'm sure it won't be, but it sounds amazing. And we actually met here in Urban Jungle, didn't we, where we are right now?
We did. Very exciting. One of your events.
Wow, cool. Well, start off and tell us where your love of plants first came from. How old were you when you had your very first plant in your hand?
Well, I always helped out with my mum with the gardening when I lived at home with my parents. We always did gardening like every Sunday. It was like a big kind of family activity because we have a really like long garden, so we have a lot of bedding plants, a lot of preparation for the winter and stuff. So, and we had a big greenhouse, so we were always doing gardening at home. And I kind of stopped doing it when I first got to university, and I didn't realise how much I missed it until sort of second year when I started to do plant modules, plant science related modules. I went along to just Notcutt's Garden Centre, and I had...
Or other garden centres are
or
available.
other garden centres that may be available near you. And I went in and I ended up with an orchid and a cactus, and it spiralled out of control after that. And here I am now.
So how many?
I haven't counted them all. But
I know there's a lot.
It's at least 80,
Oh,
if not more.
wow.
If
How
not
do you
more.
care for all of those?
With great difficulty.
Oh, no, it's
A
because
lot
we're
of
saying it's easy.
water.
Yeah.
It's so
It's
easy.
easy.
Oh, it's easy, but it's a long time.
Yeah,
A
and
lot
I
of
guess
time.
everything has different requirements. You probably get
Yeah.
everything from cactus to foliage plants.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And also outdoor plants, flowering plants, non-flowering plants, bonsai, everything.
Wow.
in
And
between.
this has all happened since you started studying at the UEA.
Yeah, so it's only been about 2.5 years.
Okay,
probably.
so 2.5 years, 80 plus houseplants later.
Yeah,
That's
me.
quite an addiction to plants.
It is. It was very sudden. A very strong addiction to plants.
And that's what can happen to you, everyone at
That's
home.
brilliant. And which one's your favourite?
Oh, I have a soft spot for orchids because of the variety they come in, but I think my favourite to look after are pothos.
Okay, nice.
I really
Have you
enjoy
got the golden one?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yes.
Golden, neon, marbled, everything.
You've got all of them.
Yeah. I
Is
absolutely love
there a
them.
house plant that you desire but you can't find or you can't get anywhere?
Not so much that I can't find,
Yeah.
more that I've had just repeated disastrous incidents with Cotonia.
Right.
Just
Okay.
can't like just can't look after them. My mum has one and it is very rarely watered. She forgets it's there. And it's not in a window, it's not near any sun, it's literally in the corner of a room behind a column.
But it's
And
happy.
it's alive, and it's been alive for 3 years.
And that's
I
not
don't
really where
understand.
they're meant to be.
No.
They should be in sun, shouldn't they? A
Yeah.
nice sunny windowsill.
Yeah, which
and
is where I kept
watered
mine.
just as it dries out.
Watered, yeah.
There's
just
no
died.
rhyme nor reason
No.
to growing houseplants.
They don't like me, I've decided.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to give them names. Some people give
Maybe.
their houseplants names, don't
I
they?
started when I had like 3, and then past that point, like there's no way I'll remember them all. My other housemate has tried to keep up naming all of hers, and she has sticks with like the names
The
on
names in them.
the species of plant, and then its name.
Well, I just love the fact that you are a total plant addict, and that's why you're on this podcast, Emma.
Definitely.
Yes.
So tell us about the course that you're studying now.
So it's a genetics-based course. It's not just looking at genetics, ways of manipulating plants, but also conventional breeding methods and just generally how the plant genome works. Excuse me. First of all, we start by looking at the plant genome, specific genes that we've found, the green revolution. So when we first started finding like dwarfing varieties of crop plants, a lot of crop history, and looking at how we were manipulating crops before we really understood what genetics was. Because genetics is quite a modern concept. It was only really started to be taken notice of in like the 70s. It's very young. There's still a lot that we don't know.
But it's been happening all of the time without us actually
Without
knowing
us really
about
knowing.
it.
We were just breeding plants together that had traits that we were interested in, and they just passed on. So we had a very basic understanding of inheritance of traits. We just didn't understand how it worked. So I kind of looked at the history of that, what was actually happening in the background, why it's not as simple as we originally thought when we were looking at, if you know Gregor Mendel and his pea plants, when he was doing very basic genetics with those, it wasn't as simple as he originally thought it was. And I kind of started by looking at that. That's sort of the first things that we'll look at. Then we start looking at how we can sort of monitor where the traits are and find out where they are, methods of sort of identifying where in the genome those genes we're interested are, better ways of breeding them into plants without also getting a lot of negative things that come with them, because often when you get a good trait you get a lot of negative ones that are kind of bound to it that you end up with as well.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of sort of the inbreeding problems.
Okay.
This is extraordinarily intelligent.
I know.
I just need to stop for a drink.
I need to write notes as I go along. It's amazing.
I feel like I am in
Yeah.
a class.
I've always wanted to understand plant breeding really
It
more
is
clearly,
really-
and you explain it really, really nicely
Yeah.
and in
Thank
very
you.
basic terms as well.
Do you have other friends on the course? So kind of out of all of your friends, are you the
I-
plant mad one?
I have one other friend really who does plant genetics with me. I haven't. One of my other housemates does, but all of my housemates did biology for our undergrad. But one did microbiology and science communication. But my other housemate did plant genetics and crop sciences and things like that. But really, we're the only people who are interested in it. My whole family work in finance. I don't really have any relatives that work in science at all. I have a lot of friends who work in science because we're on the same course. But actually, this course that I'm on now for my master's was a very small course. It's not many people get to do it, nor really it doesn't have that massive of an amount of people that apply for it, which is a shame, because
It
I
is
think
a
a lot of people
shame.
don't really understand what it means globally. It's such a
Okay.
popular thing for universities to have research teams looking at, but I feel like at the moment it's really not got that many young people who are interested in doing it.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of people, when they first go into biology, they're looking at plant sciences, and a lot of people go into biology being interested in medicine and animals or ecology. I think when you get people who are interested in plants, they're more interested in plant ecology, which is a shame, because I think that they don't understand how much genetics comes into that as well. Some people do, and they do genetics within ecology, but not to the same degree. I think a lot of people end up falling into plant genetics by accident, especially through the disease side of it, which I'll mention later.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of people don't study it for a master's and end up doing it for a PhD kind of by accident, because I think a lot of people don't kind of think about it and how I think
how
it's harder to
important it
understand.
actually is
yeah.
as well. Maybe it's not recognised as being something that is actually extraordinarily important going forward for the whole world. I know
It
it's
has
big,
so
but
many-
it has a massive impact.
So many applications that it can be used for, particularly with one of the main problems we have at the moment is people are starving to death and everywhere, and one of the main things that I look at is how we can stop that, not just through producing a larger calorific amount, but also a higher nutrient density. So we want to get all of the nutrients those people need into the amount of food that they need as well, because we have a lot of people who survive just off of sort of staple foods like grains, and they don't have the nutrients they need. It's called micronutrient starvation or hidden hunger. So you get a lot of people who are getting enough calories, but they're eating the same thing every day, and they
But
end
it's
up
no
deficient
good for
in
them.
vitamin
Okay.
A. You get blindness, death from just not getting a wide enough range of
So
foods.
this course covers so many different areas then, doesn't it? And part of that, which we'll talk about in a little while again, is how it connects to gardening, and what we can do,
Exactly.
how gardeners at home, can view their plants and
Definitely.
how things will change going forward, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, because
Really
perhaps one of the barriers to that is people's opinions and hysteria over
Exactly.
GMO, isn't it? And
One part of my course that we have to look at is more the legal side of GMO and genetics. Is the only real reason that we have not to have GMO. There's no scientific evidence at all, even over like fairly long period studies. There's no evidence of any negatives of a GMO crop, but people have such a negative view of it because they see it as this kind of Frankenstein thing where you're growing ears on the backs of mice and
but I
stuff.
think later in the podcast we'll actually talk about some everyday plants that are in gardens that were GMO.
Yeah.
And we'll
And we don't even know
uncover
about
that
it.
later on,
Exactly.
and you will be surprised. You really will.
I love how Emma's enthusiasm for gardening and plants started when she was really little, just gardening at home.
Yeah, it just reminds me of myself, to be honest. And even sitting here talking to her she's so young and it's so different. And I just wish that when I was that age, I could have talked so freely about plants and be so openly and honestly interested in them. But I had to hide it because it just wasn't cool. And
But it's cool now.
yeah, definitely.
Especially the houseplant
But
thing.
I'm jealous. I want to wind back 10 years, you know.
But you can't go back, but we can go forward,
Yeah.
Michael. I know, I agree. And I think we've both said it before. No one knew that I enjoyed gardening when I was younger.
Exactly.
You
Keep
didn't-
it all
you
the
just didn't
secret.
say.
Yeah, just.
But now it's out there, you know, and it is cool. And so Emma obviously started at university and then began her houseplant collection and got 80 in 2 years. That's a pretty good collection,
That's
right?
more than I had when I was young as well.
But I think it's worth noting that we see loads of houseplants on Instagram and everything, but they do take time to look after, which Emma
They
said,
do,
you know.
yeah. But she's prepared to put the care to it because it's her passion, and I was the same. I was spending every hour in my greenhouse, outdoors. I was really, and even better, she wants to study it and make it a career.
I know, and well, what a course to take on as well. It just sounds also kind of over my head.
She's a real bright spark.
She really is a bright spark. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the course and plant genetics in depth because, you know, we grow our plants and we enjoy them and we love them, but we don't actually think about the fact that many of these are genetically modified. You know, there's people behind the scenes working on producing plants for us to use in our gardens that, you know, are disease resistant.
Yeah, if only people knew how some of those plants were created.
Well, you know what? I think that perhaps they're about to find out.
Yeah.
So, Emma, your course is plant genetics and crop improvement, but your particular thesis is, and this is a bit of a tongue twister for me, but you tell me this is one of the shorter names for the thesis that people are working on. It is an investigation into polyploidy, autopolyploidy, and allopolyploidy in diploid and tetraploid populations of model plants Arabidopsis arenosa, also known as mouse ear cress. Now, can you tell us about that, but in a lot more of a nutshell?
All I can say is I'm so pleased you had to say that, not me.
My tongue is exhausted. Good night.
In a nutshell. So basically, I'm looking at this model plant, which I did not know was called mouse ear cress.
So we're
until
calling it a
just now.
model plant. What we mean by that is the specimen, the chosen plant that the course is based around.
So a model plant in genetics basically means a plant that scientists use to represent a lot of other plants that are harder to work on. So model plants generally consist of sort of Arabidopsis thaliana, not generally the one I'm looking at, but it's closely related to because it's related to brassicas, which is a lot of crop plants.
Righto.
We've also got medicago and tobacco. Medicago we tend to look at because it's a legume. And tobacco we tend to look at because it is a crop plant, but it's very easy to work with. So those tend to be the model plants. It basically means it's a plant that is easier to genetically work with and work within the lab.
Okay, and what work are you doing with this plant?
So we have found, in my lab, we've found this population of an Arabidopsis arenosa, which has double the size genome of the normal populations that we would see. So when you have an event where a plant spontaneously doubles its genome, It has a lot of problems with surviving after that because it has double the amount of a lot of hormones, so it gets very confused signals. The cell size will double as well, which the plant will double in size, which often causes problems with surviving in certain environments, and tons of other problems I won't go into.
But this is something that could just happen naturally,
Yeah, spontaneously.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the genome of a plant is what is that for kind of listeners? What is
So
a genome?
every living thing has a genome. It's basically the collection of genes in that organism.
Okay, referred to as a genome.
The genome, the
Okay.
whole genome, is all of your genes. That includes genes that will make changes. It includes random bits of sequence that mean nothing, or at least we don't know what they mean. It includes everything, every part of your DNA.
And most plants have two sets. Is that
Yeah,
right?
so the most common thing to find is that they'll have two sets, like we do, so that's a diploid. But I'm looking at polyploid plants, which means that they just don't have one. But
Okay.
more commonly, when we talk about polyploids, it means that they'll have four. So that's a tetraploid, and we've found a population that is a tetraploid. So it has double the amount that we would normally find in that species of plant.
Okay.
And basically, we want to look at the fact that when it doubles in size, which obviously when you're talking about crops, that could be really useful. It'll have double the amount of all of the chemicals it produces, so any nutrients and minerals that the plant will have, it will produce double of, which is obviously something that's really exciting when you're talking about crop plants.
It's also genetic modification, though, isn't it?
Well,
Which
yes.
we will come to.
Yes, we will.
Give us an example for listeners of what a diploid is at home. You know, like
Yeah.
what a gardener would.
Yeah. So most of your ornamental plants will be diploid.
Okay.
Tomatoes are diploid, but if you're looking at a potato or a strawberry, they're octoploids.
Right.
So they have 8 copies of their genome instead of 2.
Okay.
Yes. So each parent will pass on 4 copies instead of just the 1.
And does
Right.
that make any real difference to them in what we see as this plant, or is
Yeah,
just that
so-
is the fact?
Originally, potatoes before they were octoid wouldn't have looked anything like they do now. Same with strawberries; they would have looked quite different.
Really? So
a
they
lot
were
of the-
yeah,
made to look like that? Then?
A lot of the
Or-
traits that we'll see in a lot of our crop plants, they've been there for a very long time. But when you get double of the amount of a copy of a gene you have, it means that that gene can mutate into a new trait without that plant losing something very important. So if you have, for example, if we were to have a mutated gene, often you find that leads to some kind of disease. For example, if you get a mutation in one of your sex chromosomes, you often won't survive, but you can end up with some kind of mutation of a form of a sex or gender. And that will cause problems. But when you have multiple copies of your genome, you still have that working gene, but instead of having 2 of it, you'll just have 1 and it will survive, but you also have this new load of genes which can produce a new trait. So you can end up being able to put a novel trait in without actually having to edit anything. It will do it naturally. So mutations will occur in that gene which won't cause death. So the plant will still survive, and it's able to pass on the mutated version of that gene, and then over time you end up with a new trait that's in
Okay.
the place of that old
So
gene.
potatoes, for example, have they mutated spontaneously themselves over the years,
Yeah.
or have people
So
genetically modified?
it's hard to know exactly what happened because obviously potatoes have been farmed for much longer than we can
in many
say.
different places around
In
the world.
loads of different places, which is why you get loads of different types of potato, loads of different variants. The same with things like wheat and all of the most crop plants. You end up with loads of different variants from loads of different places, and those events will have spontaneously happened. It's very difficult to force a mutation without some kind of interference with some kind of mutagen, which could be a chemical or radiation. So it's very difficult for someone to have done that without knowing it.
Right,
so
okay.
these
Okay.
Naturally
they would have happened
mutating
naturally.
potatoes
Yeah.
and plants over many years.
Mutations happen in your genome all the time. It's just often we have mechanisms in place, like plants do, to fix these mutations when they happen. Loads of different things in place because your DNA is being copied all the time to produce proteins. Mistakes happen, but we have lots of things in place to correct them. But if they manage to get past all of those, because they happen all the time, just constantly. Mutations do get through, and they can cause changes. Very unlikely, but sometimes they do happen. And when we're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of years, they will have happened. So kind of what we see now is.
So all of this research that you're doing now, and of course there's other research all around the world into this kind of thing, what does that mean? How can that help to improve our crops or the plants that we garden with, or how is that going to help us going forward?
So going back to my course, to make this kind of an easier example, we have different sections in our course where we look at the different types of improvement that we can do. So we look at yield, we look at the yield of different chemicals it produces. So we're looking at the size of the plant, but we're also looking at what that plant produces. So, for example, a seed producing more protein or more starch and things like that. We'll look at disease resistance, and we'll also look at things like climate change, and we're looking at how much carbon dioxide things take up, how much carbon dioxide things need, how efficiently they do that. Also fertilizers, because we have a massive problem with overusing fertilizers. We can try and change it so that the plant is more efficient and doesn't need as many fertilizers.
Right, that's really
Also that they are able to take things up better from the soil, because most plants are quite inefficient at getting things out of the soil. Often they need the help of another thing, like bacteria,
right, yeah.
which is the case in most plants, which is why we'll put mycorrhizing fungi in our soil, because they're able to take up something that the plant can't do naturally, which is phosphorus. But if we are able to work out what it is in that mycorrhizing fungi, if we can work out that process and we can put it into a plant, then it can do it itself without us needing to fertilise more and put loads in so that it picks up some of it, because plants aren't very good at doing it.
So just touching on the climate change comment that you made there, going forward, obviously we've got all of this going on. Perhaps it's going to get very hot and dry. Temperatures are rising. Perhaps we'll have less water. All of those kind of things.
And
so
also
are they flooding on the flip
in
side
loads
as well?
of different scales, we're going to have a lot of climate changing. So what my course looks at in relation to that is trying to make it so that we have crops that are more tolerant of abiotic stresses, which are your environmental stresses, as well as biotic stresses. And we want to make it so that plants are more tolerant of these things. So we have plants that are more tolerant to high salt levels. If we've got sea flooding, there's going to be a lot of salt water rather than fresh water. There's going to be a lot of salt in the soil. We want plants that are able to deal with that. We want plants that are able to deal with drought without dying. We want more frost tolerant plants, particularly in Europe.
Which is great, not just kind of in the bigger picture, but also for home gardeners as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It means that you're
What does it mean to me in my garden, basically?
And that's how a lot of people will be thinking,
And also,
won't it?
it means disease resistance as well is a massive thing, particularly when you're looking at your own gardens. People are spraying all their plants with pest control, and often they're not as effective as they used to be. People will find that, I've been using this for years and it was always really good, but it's not that great anymore.
Or people won't spray and treat the pest and disease and then be dissuaded from gardening because they have a lot of failures.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if we're able to work out how we can make our plants more tolerant or able to react better, because plants have an immune system just like we do. If we're able to make the plants work better and recognise different diseases, then that could mean a massive thing for gardeners, not having to worry about treating things before they get too far, or if you've got something in your soil that you just can't get rid of. We could try and make it so that that's not a problem, because your plants can deal with it anyway.
This makes me very excited.
So you're really kind of, in plain terms, you're looking at how to make plants stronger
Yes.
and more
Improving-
resilient,
more resilient
and
to
able to look
changes.
after themselves.
Exactly, because when
Be
you
healthier.
start cultivating plants, they do get
Okay.
more sensitive, because you're trying to make them produce so much more stuff. You're making them a lot more specialised. That means that they need a lot more input. They're not as hardy. Our most hardy plants are weeds, because
I was actually then going to say to you,
Yeah.
is there any
Constantly.
chance
We
you
should
could
eat
research
more.
into getting rid of bindweed? That would be really helpful.
it would be so helpful.
But what about also, not necessarily from all these practical terms, but also ornamental, because by making a plant tetraploid, for example, increasing the genome, we can make them more decorative and
Exactly.
fancy. And you mentioned to us earlier that there's one plant that's in our gardens which is actually has undergone this process and is still continuing to be done to this plant, isn't it? And it is the humble daffodil,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it actually happens in a lot of plants, but you particularly see it in daffodils, where you have double floral structures. So you'll have 2 lots of petals. They look a lot prettier. People really like them. But that is a gene. That
It's
is
because
genetic
it's
modification.
tetraploid rather than diploid.
Yeah, so you get
Yeah.
double of this copy of a gene specifically, and it gives you 2 lots of petals.
So is that one plant that is technically being, in inverted commas, genetically modified in front of
Yes.
our very eyes?
Yeah.
Nah, you heard it here.
Yeah.
You heard that here.
Okay, so breeders in Holland, that is, how are they
It's
doing
very,
that then?
It's
And around the
often
world?
was originally realised because it was a mutation. When you're looking at ornamentals, people don't want to pay the money to do a lot of the more complex and modern genetic modifications where you're putting a specific gene into something, but they will pay to undergo huge mutation screens. So that's where you get 1,000 of a plant and you subject them to a mutation, and that can cause
Is it
loads of
sometimes
different changes.
radiation?
Yeah, so you can have chemical ones or you can have radiation.
I've heard of this
ones.
before. When I was at Thompson Morgan, we considered sending a whole batch of Ipomoea, Morning Glory, off in order to get those mutations, because it's something that reacts quite readily to that. And
Exactly.
I've heard of tulips being sent for radio. Also, hydrangeas
Yeah,
as well.
hydrangeas. It's really common with. That's a really popular
Okay.
one to do it with in plant breeders.
So
that is-
basically, loads of our garden plants have actually been genetically
They've been
modified, and we don't even
mutated.
realise
But it's a
that.
safe process.
Yeah, there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong
so-
with it. It's not gonna randomly pass on unless you breed them.
It's just
And
people's kind of
It can't jump around.
touchiness.
It
about
is.
isn't
As
it?
soon as
Yeah.
you hear genetically modified,
it's like, oh,
people
no, not in my garden.
immediately, yeah, like, I don't want
Those
that.
plants that have been, the plants you have are not the ones that were mutated.
Yeah.
You are like 8 to 10, sometimes 12 generations down the line by the time they start selling that plant. So by the time you've got it, you're about 20, 25 generations
But it
down,
has,
and it's stable
we can thank that manipulation for the plant that we're then enjoying in our
because of
gardens.
a genetic
Yeah.
process.
Wow, that's very fascinating, isn't it? What about like in the news? Like a lot of people see lots of talk about GMO, blah blah, but something that we've experienced in the industry over the last couple of years is a big hysteria over petunias, because suddenly a few years ago they released a lot of orangey coloured petunias, and then it was found that they were genetically modified in order to create that orange. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just creating orange, but sometimes different shades of blue and purple included that orange gene. So a lot have been withdrawn from the marketplace.
Yeah.
And some that were very beautiful and enjoyed by myself in the industry, but also home gardeners.
Absolutely.
So what happened there?
So it was done in a similar way to with double floration. They had been through a mutation process, but they were looking for something, a gene specifically. So a gene had been identified that controlled colour. So it's very popular in ornamentals. It happens even at the John Innes Centre where I'm doing my research. There are labs who are looking into kind of blue colours of like roses and things like that.
Of course.
What about blue marigolds?
Blue everything.
That would be cool.
Blue everything.
Yeah.
Blue
But it's a
everything.
very difficult coloration to find naturally in plants. But when they find a gene that you can mutate where it will cause a different colour, they were specifically looking for a mutation in this gene, and they were putting a marker into the gene, which just allows you to show where it just shows you where the gene is. It doesn't have any other effect. It just allows you to see what exactly you're mutating. So when a mutation was occurring in that space, they were able to notice it, and because it had gone through a more heavy, I guess, genetic modification,
Okay.
in inverted commas, than normal, and that came out, it had very negative press. People were saying that it was kind of not told because they knew that people wouldn't like it. People, as soon as they hear genetic modification,
Yeah.
kind of panic.
Immediately.
And
yeah.
because these plants got such a negative press and people didn't trust them, they ended up stopping making them
What
because
did they think
it
was
wasn't
going
worth
to
it.
happen? Though? The plants were not going to become monsters and take over the
so
world.
obviously it's hard from my perspective to really understand what people think is going to happen, but most of the things I hear are that it's not natural, whatever that means.
Yeah, exactly.
Because nothing's really natural.
Yeah.
I don't really understand what they mean, but that clothes aren't natural because we've changed things. We changed
Yeah.
Damn right.
everything.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
nothing's really the way it was originally when it became a thing that existed, but it isn't natural. They worry that the mutation will spread like cancer, but it's not. Even though cancer is a mutation, that's not how cancer works. It's people don't understand it, and they apply it to a more simplified version of something that they will have learned at school, but a lot of what we learn before you get to a more specified level is very simplified. And it's mostly that people just don't really understand, and they panic and they don't like it. And it's safer to just not have it.
So really, we need to get we need people to be more educated in what genetically modified actually means, and the massive benefits of it as well overall. And I'm sure if you tell many gardeners that, you know, these processes could perhaps eradicate bindweed or,
I think it takes
something like that, they'd be happy.
It'll take a sea change, and also
It will, yeah.
we've talked about garden snobbery before. I think it might be linked a little bit like to that, and kind of
Yeah.
purist attitudes within the horticultural space.
Yeah, everything in
but
life
things
evolves.
are changing, and of course, you know, you're much younger than a lot of the people that are working in that industry,
Yeah.
and that is what's great about it, because changing attitudes is what is going to help us.
It's going to keep us
definitely.
all evolving, and the planet still thriving at the end of
It's
the day.
amazing. I
Isn't
think
it?
the work you're doing is incredible, and
Me too.
so important as well.
My mind is slightly blown right
I
now.
know. I think we need some little bit of light-hearted banter to finish off, because I've been so kind of intrigued, because I'm looking at you and you're kind of like early 20s or so. That may or may not be a compliment. But
It's true, so it's fine.
when I was your age, I was not so confident about my love of plants. I was kind of keeping it a secret pretty much, kind of like burrowing away at the weekends in my shed, my greenhouse. I definitely wasn't telling my friends what I was up to.
Yeah.
But you
It's hard
kind
to
of...
hide when you get to 80 plants.
Well, I guess so. So,
they
so
they
tell me.
flow out of my bedroom.
So tell me, not about your friends that love plants, but what about your friends that aren't plant lovers? How do they accept your love of plants and gardening, and do they find it strange? or
Even
what?
some of my friends
How is
that
it?
do like plants, they think I'm quite odd. Like,
Really?
yeah.
Okay.
So, like, my dad really loves
Because you're
gardening
so
outside,
extreme
but he
with
thinks
it.
that I am insane. Like, absolutely
Well,
mad.
because of the houseplant.
Yeah, he like the point that I've got. He's like, why don't you just like, why do you care? Like, it's just
Oh, this isn't the answer I wanted.
you know. And
Damn.
yeah, but like my housemates, you know, some of them, you get very one way or very the other. Like one of
Okay.
my housemates who I was on Ellen's radio show with, Samantha, she very much like absolutely loved it. Like she saw my room being full of plants, it looked like a jungle, and she loved it. And now she's got loads of houseplants as well, and she's learning to propagate things, and it's been really fun. Like one of my other housemates, he's like ended up very begrudgingly taking on some of my plants that I've sort of been like, oh, have
But you know,
this,
perhaps there is this with any industry or any hobby as well.
Yeah.
Some people love it, some people don't. You can't make people love it, can you? You just
Yeah.
hope that you can perhaps
It's not so much
inspire someone a little.
they think it's like a bad hobby or like pointless or like you know they don't like gardening or they don't like plants. It's just that they're not interested and they think that my clear like really deep interest of it, they think that like super weird, like
Well, look, Emma, it's not super weird.
But do you feel
are-
shame?
no.
Regardless, so
There's
they
no
go.
garden shame going on here.
I think times have changed enough that even
Yeah.
if you are into odd stuff and you've kind of
That's
got
okay.
this weird hobby,
Yeah.
people respect that. They might think
Absolutely.
it's
My
weird,
parents
but they're
think
not
I'm
going to shame you.
super odd.
Yeah, so
Super
that
odd.
that is one big difference from when I
It
was
is.
younger.
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
totally agree.
Yeah.
I think being odd is much more accepted.
Being,
Yeah, definitely.
being odd or weird or geeky
Yeah.
is
Unique.
so
Plant
cool.
geek, putting my
Plant
hand up.
geek, yeah.
Let's all put our hands up.
Yeah,
actually.
we're all
definitely.
plant geeks. Emma, it's been
Thank
an
you.
absolute joy to sit and listen to you. I'm properly, fully
And
in
explained
on
so
this.
beautifully and kind of
Eloquently.
succinctly as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
really
you very
good.
much.
Where can we find you on social media?
So my Instagram is at Emma Howrad.
How rad is Emma?
I thought it was a misspelling of your surname. And then I realised, but it took me a long time.
I actually used to always spell my name wrong when I was like typing.
Oh, really?
And I always used to accidentally spell it as Emma
Howrad.
Howrad, and it became like a joke with me and my
I
friends.
think
and
it was just an
like,
ego thing.
To be
really.
honest, Emma,
Subconscious, yeah.
we think you are totally rad, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.
Are you then about to take a
It's
snap
gonna
of your
take
coffee?
a final gulp of my coffee. I've spent too long in Asia because
It's quite normal to slurp your hot drinks, but I find that now I'm back in Europe, I'm doing that in public quite a lot.
Yeah,
so.
it's very loud.
But you behave differently in every kind of country. There's a different way to behave or a different type of coffee to drink as well.
Yeah.
I've just been in Germany, and had some really nice. They tend to have their coffee almost strong but milky.
Okay.
So, but
like a latte.
no, it's almost like a bad coffee, but it's good.
A bad coffee.
Yeah. It's hard to
Okay, so
describe.
I probably won't be ordering coffee overseas.
but-
I can't drink coffee anyway.
Oh,
so
really?
I don't
Oh.
drink it very
Well,
much. So I'll leave that to you.
Ask me why I've been in Germany.
And what I was going to do is ask you. Okay, yeah, I'll ask you why. I won't ask you what I was going to ask you because that would be wrong. What have you been doing in Germany?
Well, funny you should ask. I've been at a trade show, the IPM Essen trade show, which is the horticultural event of the year for the industry.
Yeah.
So that is where you can go and pick up on the new trends. A lot of the companies are displaying kind of garden centre concepts. I sniff out a lot of new mail order products and things that we're going to see in our gardens coming up. And it's not like they set the trends there, but people like me, we go there and we detect the trends.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
early in the year, isn't it, for that reason? Because it's showing you new products and what's there, and then you come back with all these new ideas
Yeah.
and suggestions. But I saw your photographs.
Conifers.
So
Conifers.
no, we can talk about conifers. That is a podcast for the future because I love my conifers.
But conifers, think about conifers, right? Succulents are popular right now.
Yeah.
There's going to be a time limit on that. People are going to get bored of it. But what do succulents give you indoors? They give you a range of colours, range of textures.
Yeah.
They look the same all year round. Conifers do just that, but
Exactly
outdoors.
the same for outside.
What other plant would do that? I almost considered ornamental grasses, but of course they're not evergreen.
No.
Conifers are evergreen. They look good all
They
year round.
are. And
They're the next succulent.
they are,
the
and
next
actually
big succulent.
planted with perennials, you can create some stunning designs.
Yeah, you've
with
been in
conifers.
Blooms recently and seen that, haven't you? in
Adrian
Bressingham?
Bloom over at Bressingham is a master of planting with conifers, and some of the designs in his beds there are really second to none. They're beautiful, and it's all because of the structure, the colours, and the texture that conifers give.
Definitely. There's some very cool ones coming through. There's one, Foya. I can't pronounce TH, I'm so sorry. Foya, which is called Sunny Smaragd.
Okay.
It's a Dutch word.
Yeah.
Needs to be translated, I think. But it's almost like it's colour changing. It's golden tipped, and it just changes colour through the season. And I had a great time learning lots of different conifers, such as there's a Foya called whipcord as well, which looks like a sexy harness.
Does it now? I don't know what a sexy harness even looks like.
Nor do I, but find out soon. I don't know.
I don't know how to continue this conversation.
Yeah, what other trends were there though? Yeah, there was still a lot of houseplants. Do you know what, Ella Mary? I'm over houseplants. I'm looking for the next Monstera, to be honest. And I think I found it.
I know what it is. I know what the next Monstera is.
Of course you do. You follow me on Instagram.
No.
Oh, maybe you
I
did.
know what the next... I
you think
have
it's different to
my
what
next
I...
Monstera, but it is a houseplant.
Yeah, what is it then?
It's the bromeliads.
No!
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
But they're so boring. I know they're colourful, but they're kind of... Bromeliads are like they're frozen in time. I don't know. I've never liked them.
Okay, so...
I don't know why. They seem
Michael is the trendsetter
cheap
and I'm
commodity.
not, however.
I don't know.
How are they a cheap commodity?
You're just trying to get support behind your big up Bromeliads hashtag.
Big up bromeliads.
No, don't say it.
Hashtag. Please go to it and big up your bromeliads. But I think they're ace, and also, they look pretty. They're so super easy. You get them in different colours. They grow lovely little pups, and you can plant them on to grow for the next plant. Anyway,
I've always hated them. I really have.
What was your trend then?
Well,
Next trend for you?
well, it sounds really boring in comparison, but it's a plant called Atrocarpus, which is the breadfruit, but they're now promoting it as a houseplant to use indoors, and it's got Monstera-like leaves, but with a bit more kind of jaggedness, a bit more leathery, glossy look. And it really is the Monstera with attitude.
I did
It's a
see
very
that
cool
actually
plant,
on your Instagram. Now you said that, I did see it, and it did look pretty cool.
It is a cool plant.
It seems to have like much more foliage than a Monstera, so it's kind of fuller.
Yeah, and Monstera can get out of control because it starts to climb, it kind of gets a bit messy. This is like a small tree, so it's a lot more well behaved. So
Okay.
yeah, I think maybe that could be the next big thing. There was some very cool florist displays there as well. Seeing a lot of preserved flowers in glycerine.
Okay.
So we could do some
That's-
experiments on that.
We
soon.
could. That's old school. I done that when I was a kid.
Did you really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
We used to do all of that. It's fun.
Okay,
It's
that's
good fun.
cool. I used to dry flowers when I was a kid
Yeah.
in the back of books and stuff. Probably still there now.
I've actually got a flower press.
Oh really? Oh
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, there's so much you could do to be creative. And the trends, because there's also an event in the UK coming up soon where we'll detect a lot of trends, and we're doing a lot of interviews there
Yeah.
for the podcast too,
Yeah.
and that's the Garden Press event. isn't
Garden
it?
Press event's coming up soon. It's actually that's a really good show. You get to see what's new here in the UK.
Yeah.
Meet loads of new people. A couple of years ago, I went last year and the year before, and I was a bit disappointed a couple of years ago, if I'm honest.
Really hard to please, isn't it?
I am hard to please,
Yeah.
but I was looking for something new. It was like nothing new was there.
But I think
Last year was better. Before we carry
think
on,
the
last year
premise-
was good.
I think the premise behind being a product developer, which obviously I've been doing for a lot of my career, is not always what is displayed as new in front of you, but it's about looking at what's there and devising what is new out of it. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's not very often I would see something that someone was telling me was new, was exciting. I kind of want to develop that myself.
But you did in essence.
Yeah, exactly. So,
So we need to be seeing some of that here in the UK.
yeah. Let's hope we can feed some of that stuff through.
I love the Garden Press event.
Definitely with with different articles, videos I put on my website at the moment, and we'll have some great interviews with some people from there
I'm
as
really
well.
looking forward to that.
So super.
So there'll be loads coming up on the podcast from that as well. So
Yeah,
it's all
can
good.
I finish my coffee now?
Can you show everyone how you slurp? Come on, do it properly, just so
No,
everyone
because
can
it's
hear
really
you.
cold now.
Come
Actually.
on, ready?
Oh, it stinks.
Oh,
I can't do
okay.
it.
Everyone, sorry, you don't have the pleasure of hearing Michael slurp his coffee.
The Plant-Based Podcast is sponsored by Suttons, suppliers of gardeners' favourite products since 1806. Unsurprisingly, Suttons now have everything you need for your outside space. Award-winning flower and vegetable plants, garden furniture and equipment, plus gifts for gardeners. Visit them online at suttons.co.uk.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Plant-Based Podcast.
Have a browse of the rest of the library or hop on over to the website, which is theplantbasedpodcast.net.
You'll also find our social media links. Please connect with us and let us know about any plant-based projects that you think we should be covering on the show.
And make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you'll be the first to hear the next episode. We're releasing once a fortnight. So until next time, enjoy the world of plants.